I usually read sitting down, but now since you can't see my feet, I'm just going to take off my shoes. Okay, there we are on the first floor. So, as I was coming here, I was wondering if there were going to be any writers in the audience this evening. So may I ask if there are any writers in the audience this evening? Okay, so I'm very proud of being a writer, and I'd appreciate it if you'd show some pride and are kind. Put up the hands a little bit higher. Okay, that's good. It's like I used to do it. Because I was talking to someone as I was on my way over here about how Ghana Must Go came to be, and how in the process of getting this book published, I came to understand something about the confidence and the courage that it takes to write and to keep writing before something like this happens. And as I was telling her the story, she said, you should share that this evening because there may be some writers there whom it would help to hear that story. So I'll tell it to you. When, as some of you may have read, I was leaving Oxford, I had the great fortune of meeting Professor Toni Morrison. Through a few things happened, and she gave me a deadline to submit some fiction to her to read, and to meet that deadline, I wrote The Sex Lives of African Girls. And she liked it, I liked it, I thought it was okay. And so I, as you do, I sent it to the unsolicited publication address, submissions address of Granta magazine, but their New York office. And I should first say, I began The Sex Lives of African Girls in a writing workshop that Micah attended, and my fellow workshop participants were amazing, really honest with their feedback, really encouraging, but also very honest with their feedback. They told me what was working, and they told me as gently what was not working, and that helped me very much get the piece to the state it was in when I emailed it from Ethiopia to Professor Morrison. Okay, now we fast forward. She liked it, I liked it. I sent it to the unsolicited submissions address of the New York office of Granta with high hopes and a self-addressed returned envelope. And then that was that. I went on a retreat in Sweden with a dear friend. I got the idea for Ghana Must Go. I wrote 100 pages. I found my agent. And my agent found my publisher. Okay, happy story. Then my agent, because he's an agent, asked me, this is good, these 100 pages. Do you have anything else I can sell? I was like, well, there is one thing. I have this short story that I wrote, but it's kind of weird. It's sort of a novella. I don't really know what it is. And so he said, let me see it. So I sent him The Sex Lives of African Girls, the same exact story, with the same exact words that I had sent to Professor Morrison and to the unsolicited submissions address of Granta's office in New York. He liked it. Remember, I liked it, Professor Morrison liked it, he liked it. And I said, okay, yeah, let's see what we can do with it. And he sent it to the UK office of Granta, which is in fact where Granta is based, in London. They liked it, they bought it, and though it was, in between you and me still is a little too long, they decided to publish it. So, because I think God has a sense of humor, the same week that I spoke with my agents, they said, great, Granta wants to publish your first short story. We think this is right, because you were born in London, blah, blah, blah. And I said, great, they like it. And we were all set to go. They sent me a contract to sign. Great. That same week, I got an email from the New York office of Granta, which receives so many unsolicited submissions that it takes them a very long time, as you can imagine, to go through all of them. So they were just now, close to a year later, getting to my submission, my unsolicited submission. And I opened this email, and it's funny because this was all happening in the same week. I just assumed that it was related to the contract or some such. But no, it was a very politely, but really quite explicit rejection of my short story, criticizing, amongst other things, my very florid language, and it is. and the second person, and all sorts of things which sting the bruised ego of a rejected writer. And I was so unsure of myself that I immediately wrote to my agents and I said, you know, I don't understand if they changed their mind, why wouldn't they just tell me? I could have made changes to the story, and like I've already used the payment for my rent. It's really awkward that they don't want to publish it now. And my agent is like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, Granta doesn't want to publish my story anymore. And he's like, what are you talking about? And I was like, well, I just got this email from them saying they don't want to publish my story for very explicit, like paragraphs and paragraphs of reasons. And he said, send me that email. I did. About 24 minutes went by, and I received another email from the New York office of Granta, and it was also paragraphs long. And it went something along the lines of, Dear Taiye, it is true that we at the New York office received your unsolicited submission and did not, and really do not wish to publish it. But it is also true that our, parent office in London bought it and decided to make it the centerpiece of their feminism issue. So your story will be published in the May issue of Granta, and all manner of hilariousness. And I remember closing that email and thinking, this is the best thing that could have ever happened to me as a writer. Like, absolutely the best thing that could have ever happened to me. Because the story that one editor rejected for paragraphs of reasons. I mean, it wasn't just like, we don't want your story. It was like, you should really think about becoming a better writer in the following ways. It was that letter. And if any of you have sent submissions unsolicited to places, maybe you know this letter. It's long. Why does it have to be long? Why can't it be like a college rejection, like you didn't get it? Reading that about the exact same story, the exact same words, not a semicolon changed, hearing one reader hate it, knowing that another reader loved it, knowing that another writer whom I loved really rather liked it, somehow didn't matter. And what I was left with, and I can see this moment clear as day, and I'm so happy it happened before I finished this novel, what I was left with was the question, simply, do I like it? And I tell this story a lot whenever I feel like I'm talking to writers, because I think it's something that we often forget because we are in a judgmental industry, and it's very difficult to know when you are receiving rejection or criticism, whether that means that what you wrote isn't good. And I will say that experience with The Sex Lives of African Girls, which, same exact story, not a semicolon changed, went on to Best American Short Stories, which always makes me laugh. I'm like, I wonder, and that editor still doesn't like it. He has told me, and he has every right not to like it, but I do. And it took me a really long time as a writer to get to that point where the only standard to which I held my writing and hold my writing is that, whether or not I like it, whether I feel that I've done the best I can do, and whether I feel that I've been true to whatever impulse it was that drove me to the MacBook Air in the first place. So, just taking off all my clothes here. You guys can start throwing single dollar bills over here. Okay, I will read from the beginning of Ghana Must Go. About which I'll say just a little bit. Ghana Must Go is the story of a family. The father, Kweku, is from Ghana, and he's a surgeon. The mother, Fola, is from Nigeria, and she, though she had wanted to be a lawyer, is a housewife for most of the novel. They have 4 children. Olu, the eldest, becomes a doctor like his dad. The twins, Taiwo and Kainde, become creatives, I'll say, generally speaking. And the youngest, Sadie, is a junior in high school, in college rather, when the action begins. In part 1, called Gone, Kweku dies. which happens in the first 2 words. That is not a spoiler. In part 2, called Going, the family finds out that Kweku is dead and makes their arrangements to go to Ghana for his funeral. And in part 3, called Go, the family comes together for the first time in many years for the funeral of Kweku. And in so doing is forced to confront all manner of dark secrets that they've been keeping from each other and from themselves for the 16 years since Kweku left the family. But at the beginning, in part 1, Gone, while Kweku is still with us, his fourth daughter, Sadie, has just been born premature. So I'll read a little bit. There we go. From the beginning. They don't promote naming in the NICU, as he discovered during his 3rd-year pediatrics rotation, that heartbreaking winter 1975, with his mother just dead and his first son just born. If some ill-fated infant wouldn't last through the weekend, they discouraged its parents from picking a name, scrawling baby with the surname on the incubator label, ABC surname for multiples. Many of his classmates found the practice uncouth, a sort of premature throwing up of hands in defeat. These were Americans mostly, with their white teeth and cow's milk, for whom infant mortality was an inconceivable thing, or rather, conceivable in the aggregate as a number, a statistic, i.e., X% of babies under 2 weeks will die. Conceivable in the plural, but unacceptable in the singular, the one gray blue baby, the late baby surname. To the Africans, by contrast, and the Indians and West Indians and the one escapee Latvian for whom Baltimore was comfortable, a dead neonate was not only conceivable but unremarkable, all the better when unavoidable, i.e. explicable. It was life. To them, the non-naming was logical, even admirable, a way to create distance from existence, so from death. Precisely the kind of thing they always thought of in America and never bothered with in places like Riga or Accra. The sterilization of human emotion, the reduction of anguish to Hallmark card hurt, the washing as by sedulous scrub nurse of all ugliness off grief's many faces, faces Kweku Sai knew. To him, who could name grief by each one of her faces, the logic was familiar from a warmer third world, where the boy who tails his mother freshly bloodied from labor, fruitless labor, to the edge of an ocean at dawn, who sees her place the little corpse like a less lucky Moses, all wrapped up in palm frond and froth, then walk away, but who never hears her mention it, ever, not once, learns that loss is a notion no more than a thought, which one forms or one doesn't with words, such that one cannot lose nor ever say he has lost what he does not permit to exist in his mind. Even then, at 24, a new father and still a child, a newly motherless child, Kweku knew that. Winter again, 1989. The delivery ward at the Brigham. Fola propped up in the hospital bed, still bloody from labor and clutching his arm. The twins, 9 years old, fast asleep in the lounge in those ugly blue chairs with the yellow foam stuffing, arranged as they always were, locked into place like some funny wooden Japanese logic game puzzle. Taiwo's head on Kainde's shoulder, and Kainde's cheek on Taiwo's head. A girl and a boy with the same amber eyes throwing sparks from their otherwise gentle young faces. Olu eating apple slices, already so healthy at 14 years old, reading Things Fall Apart. The single visible sign of his mounting distress, the rote up and down bounce of his femur. And the newborn, yet unnamed, fighting for life in its incubator, losing, baby Sai. In the rancid delivery room, what's wrong with Iruwu? Where are they taking her? She clutched his bare arm. He was still in his scrubs, nothing else, arms uncovered. He'd been stitching when she went into labor too soon. A friend at the Brigham had had him paged over the intercom, and he'd run through the snow from Beth Israel here, with the swirling flakes clouding his vision as he ran, and the words, 2 words clouding his thinking, too soon. It was too soon. No, not a human sound, animal. A growl rumbling forth from the just emptied belly, a battle cry. But who was the enemy? Him, the obstetrician, the timing, the belly itself. Folashade, he murmured. Kwiku no, Fola growled, her teeth clenched, her nails piercing his goose-pimpled skin, drawing blood. Kwiku no. Now she started to cry. Please, he whispered, stricken, don't cry. She shook her head, crying, still piercing his arm, and other pierceable parts of him neither perceived. Kwiku no, as if changing his name in her mind now from Kwiku, just Kwiku, to Kwiku no. He laid his lips gently on the crown of her head, her crowning glory, Fola's hair, reduced by half by fresh sweat. A cloud of tiny spirals, each one clinging to the next in solidarity and smelling of Indian hemp. We have 3 healthy children, he said to her softly. We are blessed. Kwiku no, Kwiku no, Kwiku no. The last one was shrill, nearing rage, accusation. He had never seen Fola unraveled like this. Her 2 other pregnancies had gone perfectly, medically speaking, the deliveries like clockwork, instructional videos smooth. The first one in Baltimore when they were still children, the second here in Boston, a C-section, the twins, and now this, 10 weeks early. There was nothing to be done. You have to do something. He looked at the nurse. A drinker, he'd guess, from the paunch and rosacea. Irish from the trace of the South Boston A. But no trace of bigotry, which often went with this, and gentle eyes, grayish blue, glistening. The woman managed to frown and to smile simultaneously, sympathetically, while Fola drew blood from his arm. Where did they take her? He asked, though he knew. The nurse frowned and smiled. To the NICU. They walked down the hospital hallway in silence. His cameraman walked backward in front of them. In this scene, a well-respected doctor goes striding down the hallway to save his unsavable daughter, a Western. He wished he had a weapon, little 6-shooter, silver too, something with more shine than a Hopkins MD, and a more formidable opponent, or an opponent less formidable than the basics of medical science, the odds. Presently, Olu, what is it? End scene. Nothing, Kwiku chuckled, just tired, that's all. He patted his son's head, or his son's brow bone more accurately, his son's head having moved from where he remembered its being. He looked at Olu closely now, surprised by the height and by other things he'd seen but never noticed before. He wasn't pretty like Kainde, who looked like a girl, an impossible, impossibly beautiful girl, but had become in the course of one weekend, it seemed, a really very handsome young man. He squeezed Olu's shoulder, reassuring him, I'm fine. Olu frowned, tensing. The baby, I meant. What is it? The gender. Oh, right, Kwiku smiled. It was a girl, then it's a girl, but too late. Olu heard the past tense and glared at him, wary. What's wrong with the baby? He asked, his voice tight. The curse of her gender, impatience. Kwiku winked. She couldn't wait. Can they save it? Not likely. Can you? Kwiku laughed aloud, a sudden sound in the quiet. He patted Olu's head, this time finding his hair. His elder son's appraisal of his abilities as a doctor never ceased to amaze or delight him or appease him. His other son couldn't have cared less what he did, irrespective of the fact that they lived off his doing it. He didn't take this personally. At least he didn't think he did. At least he didn't show it when his cameraman was around. He was an intelligent parent, too rational to pick favorites, a man's man, above petty insecurities. And a well-respected doctor, one of the best in his field, goddammit, whether Kainde cared or didn't. Besides, the boy was unimpressible, perpetually indifferent. His teachers all said the same year after year. Preternatural ability, exemplary behavior, but doesn't seem to care about school, what to do. Kainde doesn't care about anything, Kwiku told him, except Taiwo. Always except Taiwo. No, he answered Olu, his laugh lingering as a smile. Olu's eyes lingering on the side of his face, then falling away. They walked farther down the hallway in silence. Suddenly, Olu looked up. Yes, you can. Kwiku peered in. There it was, on the left. 3.5 pounds, barely breathing, barely life. With all kinds of patches and tubes sticking out of it, it looked like E.T. going home. Olu pressed his hands to the plexiglass window. Which one is it? he asked, cupping his hands around his eyes. Kwaku laughed softly. Olu didn't say she, only it, one, the baby, little surgeon in the making. He pointed to the incubator, the handwritten tag. That one, he said. Baby sighed. It was the simplest thing, really, just the littlest slip, sigh, speaking aloud as he tapped on the glass, but he'd been teetering already on an edge when it happened, when pointing to the incubator, he spoke his own name. And the two put together like combustible compounds, the sound of his name breathed aloud in the space, and the sight of the neonate fighting for breath suddenly somehow made baby sigh his. It was his, she was his, and she was perfect, and she was tiny, and she was dying, and he felt it, felt this dying in the center of his chest. The force gathered, raw panic, overwhelming his lungs, filling his chest with a tingling, thick, biting, and sharp. He heard himself whisper, "There she is," or something like it, but with the constriction of his larynx, didn't recognize his voice. Neither did Olu, who looked up alarmed. "Dad," he whispered, stricken, "don't cry." But Kwaku couldn't help it. He was barely even aware of it. The tears came so quickly, fell so quietly. She was his, that precious thing there with her toenails like dewdrops, her 10 tiny fingers all curled up in hope, little fists of determination, and her petal-thin skin, like a flower that Fola could name by its face, Fola's favorite already, and she, waiting hopeful, still propped up in bed, sweating, bloodied, his too. You have to do something. He had to do something. He wiped his face quickly with the back of his arm. The salt stung the wound there. He squeezed Olu's shoulder, reassuring himself. Come on then. So if you want to see if the baby lives, you have to pay the rent. I would love to take any questions. Yes.
My name is Lee James. I have 2 questions. Okay. One is, could you describe your writing process on a daily or weekly, or does it have any routine? As to how you approach it, and to please include research, if that figures into what you're doing. The second question has to do with the reviews and the reviewing process that you've encountered with this particular book.
Okay.
And how you see it for women especially.
Okay. I'll take your second question first because it's a pretty straightforward answer. I don't read reviews. I read one, and no, I read 2. And it suddenly occurred to me, as I've been told countless times by various writers, they are not particularly useful to the novelist. Perhaps they're useful to the reader. I prefer to read books to find out what I think about them, but for the writer to read a review of something you've already done is a bit after the fact. I mean, that ship has sailed. there will be no major changes to the text between now and when it comes out in paperback. And looking forward to the next work, which in many ways I'm living with now, I certainly am asking myself questions about how to refine my writing style. But sort of as I said before, those are based more on my own sense of meter and music and meaning than they are on external evaluations. So I wish I could say more about the review process, but I've only read 2. They were nice, and I don't intend to read anymore. As for my writing process, I wish it were a bit more consistent. I've received no fewer than 8,000 times Stephen King's book on writing for Christmas and my birthday, and any holiday really, because if people in your life know that you're a writer, that's what they tend to give you. And he talks a lot about his process, as do some other great writers, like Walter Mosley has a really sort of famously regimented process. I, however, do not. I always say when it's happening fast and furious, and when it's not happening at all. And I wish that I could, when I say I wish, I mean I've tried every last thing that I've ever read that I could possibly do to smooth this process out, but it stays willfully choppy. insofar as some days are good days. I wrote 10 pages of this novel in one sitting. I got the entire idea in one shower. And then I had a 6-month writer's block between part 1 and parts 2 and 3. And I'm sort of trying to learn to accept that within reason, I would add, for the benefit of my editor. And that's just kind of how it goes. I can't say what I do when I'm stuck, though. If I wake up in the morning, I live in Rome, and I start working. I'm a night person, so when I say wake up in the morning, I'm being, figurative. The sun is out. I've gotten up very early to catch planes for the last 2 weeks, and I kept saying, wow, I only ever see 5 a.m. from the back end. I mean, it's totally different at the top of the hour. But I wake up, thank God, every day, and I will try usually to write first, before email or exposing myself to the news or taking phone calls. I usually try to give my first thoughts, my first fruits, if you will, to the muse. I usually lay something at her feet. Then I usually try to take a walk. I usually try to be outside. I usually try to expose myself to the day, to people. It's not hard in Rome. It's a very beautiful city, and without fail, something catches my eye, despite the fact that this novel is by no means set in Rome. My second one is, but this one not. Still, there will be something, a cloud passing, a exchange between a grandfather and a grandchild, a pigeon, something that demands description, or at the very least inspires observation. I'll start with that. That usually gets something going. And if that doesn't get something going, then I just resort to Prosecco or shoe shopping. And, those work really, really well. So I do a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation to keep myself calm. And I usually flip out about once every 3 months anyway. And other than that, I just kind of let the work happen in the way that it needs to, or in the way that it wants to. And I've said often of Ghana Must Go that I told the story the way it was told to me. And that's the way that I write everything.
Yes, two questions. One, I noticed you referenced Robert Hayden. And is that something, does it speak to, the poem is about death, I guess, but does it speak to your writing style in terms of Robert Hayden, and does that inform your writing style? And the other question is hyperachievement. Because the people that you describe in the book are like,
slackers?
No. And that need for hyperachievement in order to be viewed as being worthy. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Oh, that's pretty much on the surface.
Oh, okay.
Robert Hayden is one of my favorite poets. My ex-stepdad wrote his Yale thesis on Hayden, so he's been a part of my life for a very long time. But more generally, I think poetry was certainly my first love, my first literary love. And as another writer, Francine Duplessis-Gray, said, my gateway to literature was poetry. And I'm often asked now, do you consider yourself a poet?
Right.
And I don't think that novelist and poet are mutually exclusive categories. So the answer would be yes, and also a novelist. Either a poet in a novelist's clothing or a novelist in a poet's clothing, or something along these lines. So love Hayden, love poetry, love music, love meter, studied music. As poetry, music, jazz, rhythm, all of this is of the utmost importance to my sense of prose. Hyperachievement, on the other hand, my family is, when I started writing Ghana Must Go, I think it somehow happened very early that all of the superficial details of this family's life were taken shamelessly from the lives of my family members without my asking their permission. It just did, and it was only after finishing it that I realized why. And I think it was simply because by using superficial details that I knew, I was able to investigate inner truths that I did not. So I didn't intend to spend, hours on Google trying to figure out the names of streets in a city that I don't know when I actually know Brookline like the back of my hand, having grown up there. I'm not a doctor, but my twin sister and my mother and my father are. So, there are a few doctors in here, and the only surgeries that I can describe with any credibility are the ones that they do. the children in this novel were educated in exactly the same places that my twin sister and I were, and that's just because I know the names of the buildings. These characters are not the members of my family, and none of the members of my family believed that until they read the book. And then it was hugely gratifying to hear them say, oh, okay, yeah, in fact, these people, their stories, their motivations, their hopes, their dreams do not, in fact, resemble ours. But their CVs do. And that's because I do come from a very driven family, but not me alone. I mean, so many West African immigrants are raised this way. I sort of inadvertently referred to my mother as a Panther mother at the end of an interview, and then she saw it in the Wall Street Journal in really big font, and she was like, what are you talking about? But she set the bar very high. She worked incredibly hard to get from where she was born in London and then raised in Nigeria to be able to raise us in the States. And I think, quite simply, like many immigrant families, expected no less of my twin and of me. And you know, we did our best to clear that bar. Becoming a novelist was not part of that plan, I should say, but they're all sort of happy now. My aunt in Nigeria still refers to me as unemployed, but she's beyond reach. I'm like, Adizumi, I'm not unemployed. She's like, who's your employer? That's fine.
My name is Deepa Miller. We met, I think it was 7 years ago at the writing workshop, and we were just working on the first story. And you struck me as a person who knew so much more about writing. You were the person from whom I learned about what a mission narrator was. Like, what does she mean? So my question is, it seems to me that you are such a master to pick point of view, to know whether to tell the story from the third person, first person, omniscient. You told me to change my first novel from third to first. I did that. I changed back to third. So my question is, your short the story that you mentioned, I think, is from first person.
Second.
Right? Second, right, which is the hardest. And then this one, you have so many different characters. I mean, this is mastery to just keep it all together with so many different characters. So how did you arrive at this point of view? Like how did you know? Because somehow you
Yes.
I mean, since then, I feel like you know how to pick your point of view. So I'm just very curious about that.
Okay. That question of what voice to tell the story in is not one that I ever consciously ask or answer. When I start writing a story, I have lots of stories. Stories just, stories have always, since I was 4 years old, and certainly since I met you, I've always just had stories, just in my head. They just fall from the sky like coins. But the question for me, or the sine qua non vis-a-vis telling a story, is hearing the first line. I can never start a story until I hear the first line. And I say hear it because that's sort of what it feels like to me. I'm just like walking along. And you remember in that class, and you know, I'd been waiting to write this story, desperately hoping that one would come to send to Professor Morrison. And then I heard the sex lives of African girls began inevitably with Uncle. There you are, 11, alone in the study in the dark in a cupola of moonlight, blah, blah, blah. And literally, it was like I ran out. I was living with Tanisha at the time, and I wrote that down, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. What I heard was the sex lives of African girls begin to never leave with Uncle. There you are, 11. Is that a mistake? Like, was that bad transmission? And then I realized, no, okay, this story is asking, if I may, to be told in the second person, so I'll go with it. And I did. And the first 10 pages of that story happened very easily, as you may remember, and the next 10 not so much. And it was the same thing with Ghana Must Go. I had the entire idea for the novel, but it was only when I heard Quick Good Eyes Barefoot on a Sunday before sunrise, his slippers by the door to the bedroom like dogs, that I knew I was ready to begin. And that just happened to be third person, what one might call third person intimate, a third person narrator who knows everything about every character and can see into the future and back into the past. And I will tell you, I will never write a novel like that again. It is very, very difficult to tell a story in 6 voices. Really 7, including the voice of the narrator. But I'm so happy that I did for this one, and I will never, ever do it again.
I think we have time for one.
Okay, please.
I've got a nosy question.
Okay.
What do you like to read besides
was, what do I like to read? And the answer is twofold. The sad thing is that I can't read fiction when I'm writing it at all. So it was a bit annoying that this book took 2 years to write, because it means that I didn't read any fiction over the course of that 2 years, except for the 3 novels that I've read so many times and that I go back to more like, I don't know, maybe more like a jazz musician might study a certain riff. It's almost like you're not listening to it, but studying it. And those novels are The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy, The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Kundera, and then sometimes, it depends on what I'm reading. Sometimes I read Ocean Sea by Alessandro Barrico, an Italian author, sometimes, and other times I read The Great Gatsby. So just again, like on like a CD on repeat, just again and again and again and again and again and again. I read these 3 texts and nothing else when I'm working, because I say it's sort of like trying to compose with the radio on. Like I hear, it just gets in the way. But then when I stop writing, I like binge read. It's like literally I've read so many things since I stopped writing Ghana Must Go. So many wonderful things. I read this novel called Eucalyptus by an Australian author, Murray Bale. I've read this novel called A Heart So White by Javier Marias, a Spanish novelist, which is amazing. So Beautiful Ruins. I read like a maniac. And Middlemarch, and Brideshead Revisited, and Song of Solomon again and again. I read everything. I just, it's kind of a junkie. I really like prose. Yeah. Oh, okay. Little quick question.
How would you describe your role as a writer in the world? Do you write with an intended message that you want to convey? Do you see writing as a tool, like a personal analytical tool where you kind of work things out?
Right. The question is, how do I see my role as a writer in the world? And I don't see my role as a writer in the world. I only see my role as a writer in the work. And I blessed are they who take a different position, but I only write for writing's sake. I've said, and I deeply mean, that the only standard to which I hold myself is the standard of telling the truth and telling it as beautifully as I can. And that's it. I live with the characters. I write for the characters, for their story, for their humanity, for things that I don't know. There's so much in Ghana Must Go that I don't know. There's so much that I learned from writing it, and it is the thing that I love to do most in the world, and I've always loved. And so above all, I see myself as, I think of the role of the writer to play. Thank you so much for